Our next topic deals with mainly monopolies, but there's a couple subtopics in that within monopolies. And the first is robber barons. Robber barons, newspapermen came up with this title. This is what they labeled the businessmen who dominated their industries in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They began calling them robber barons. And obviously, as the name implies, robbing means to steal. They weren't too fond of them. That's the historical significance. That's where the name comes from. They didn't come up with that on their own. The person they attacked the most, the newspapers, was Rockefeller. Rockefeller, you could argue, was the most successful business person in American history. And the reason why, well, a little background on him. His company controlled over 90% of the oil in the United States during the Gilded Age. He was absolutely ruthless. The example I give in class, when we think of super competitive people today, excuse me, we often think of athletes because we can see them out on the court or on the field and see how competitive and how they're giving it their all. Rockefeller is the same way, except he's not on a court, he's not on a field, he's behind a desk. But in his mind, his job was to eliminate all his competition, and he was really, really good at it. He was absolutely ruthless. This is why I think you could argue who's the most successful business person of all time, because he's the richest American we've ever had. In today's dollars, he's worth over $300 billion. Some of the other well-known robber barons from this time period in their industry: Vanderbilt and the railroads, Carnegie Steel, Duke American Tobacco Company, J.P. Morgan. He owned the banks. He eventually buys out Carnegie Steel. Charles Schwab was also in steel, Leland Stanford. So you may notice some of these or recognize some of these last names: Stanford, Vanderbilt, and Duke, for instance. Well, there's colleges named after them. That's how much money these guys had. They had so much money, a lot of them at the end of their life began building things that will benefit the public. Carnegie built a college in Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon. Rockefeller built a college in Chicago called University of Chicago. That's the type of wealth we're talking about. Modern day robber barons: Bezos, I should fix that. He's retired. Zuckerberg, Facebook. Bill Gates, a little bit older. He started Microsoft. He's retired. And Elon Musk, who's currently in charge of SpaceX and why am I forgetting the name of the electric car company? Tesla. Thank you. Okay, so maybe there's some parallels between these people. Ignore that. Okay, all these robber barons controlled companies that would be labeled monopolies. A monopoly, by definition, is a company which controls or dominates a certain industry. A lot of times you guys want to know, well, what percent of the industry did they have to control? For instance, Rockefeller had about 90%. Is it 90% to be a monopoly? Is it 80? Is it 70? There is no magic number. It's a little bit more vague. When you can control and dominate to a point where you can do just about anything you want, then that's what we typically call a monopoly. Pros and cons. Pros. Monopolies can offer cheap quality products. And when I say cheap, I mean inexpensive, not poorly built. Standard Oil. Rockefeller, for instance, he didn't rip people off. He kept the price of his kerosene and gasoline relatively low because he believed the lower the price, the more people would buy it and the wealthier he would become. And he was spot on with that. Also, the quality of his product was good. There was nothing wrong with his kerosene or gasoline that his factories were producing. Monopolies also, if you work for a monopoly, it's a good, stable job typically. And I put underneath this, if there are a lot of different companies and they were going out of business, people would lose their job. Another thing Rockefeller did really well is he paid his employees above average wages. I'm not saying all of his employees were rich, but they were paid better than most of their peers. On the flip side, though, monopolies, two are coming up at once. Monopolies can keep prices high and quality low. Because you're controlling the industry, if Rockefeller wanted to charge super high prices for the kerosene, he could have, and customers really can't do anything about that. Also, it's difficult for new companies to start up. We like, in general, in the United States, we like new companies to start up because we like competition. Competition gives us, naturally, innovations. It gives us lower prices. It gives us better products. Because if you're not making a good product, then another company that is, all the customers are going to flock to them, and we have better products. Finally, monopolies are often able to get away with unethical and illegal things. Rockefeller was guilty of both of these things, you could argue. Unethical is more of an opinion, but illegal. There were a couple instances where his company paid Pennsylvania lawmakers to pass laws that would benefit his company. Okay, that certainly is